I could have gone and made, a game or an app that people use for, 5 minutes a day, right? And they have, millions of users and they all play this game for 5 minutes. That's great, right? That's actually a lot of value. 5 million user minutes of happiness a day is pretty neat, right? But we actually have a very different kind of opportunity, right? So people use Everlaw for hours a day, sometimes all day. So you kind of have the opportunity to not just make someone happy for 5 minutes, but actually make them materially happier at the end of the day, right? Their experience of life is better using a system like ours, right? So I think that's a pretty awesome opportunity. I don't think that comes along that often. I think I'm very lucky to have fallen into it. So I think our ambitions here are pretty big, right? I think you don't often get the chance to change the way work is done in the whole industry.
Today on Law Next, a conversation with A.J. Shankar, founder and CEO of Everlaw, an e-discovery company whose cloud platform and AI-driven analytics have drawn investments from some of the biggest venture firms in Silicon Valley. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to Law Next, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Before I get started, let me just take a moment to give a huge thanks to the sponsors who support this program. A.J. Shankar, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Looking forward to talking to you. So you started Everlaw in 2001, I believe, originally founded under the name Easy ESI. And you came into this with absolutely no background in law for the most part, as I understood it. You were a PhD computer scientist. So how did you get into this legal industry in the first place? Great
question. So one minor correction, it was actually 2011. So about 10 years later.
Did I say 2001? That was just my misspeaking. I've got 2011 here written in front of me. So.
No worries. Yeah. So 2011. You're right. I came in with really just a technical background, and the impetus was really when I was in grad school in computer science, getting my PhD. I ended up being a technical expert for a law firm. On the side, consulting part-time while getting my PhD, helping them with some kind of fairly technical lawsuits. And that's where I got to see kind of firsthand what the experience was like for lawyers, right? It was something I had no idea about beforehand. Kind of seeing how the sausage was made, of course, but also seeing the kind of increasing volume of discoverable data they had to deal with, the kind of fear and anxiety they really had around the tooling around that in terms of being able to find something important in a limited amount of time and budget. And the state of the art in the technology at the time, I think, just wasn't particularly advanced compared to, let's say, using Google to search the whole internet in half a second, right? So from my perspective, it was really just looking at the industry, looking at the kinds of problems people were facing, kind of recognizing that, at least in this space, they're all very technical problems, right? They're not really legal problems, they're technology problems. And then saying, hey, knowing what I know about computer science, that you could do this better, right? And so that's kind of what got me on this path.
Well, it's one thing to look at that and say, well, that's kind of a mess and somebody ought to clean it up. But it's another thing to actually get in there and start a company. How did you go about getting this going in the first place?
I actually had done a previous company in a completely different space. Computer vision meets soft goods. And so that company was coming straight out of grad school, and we won the Berkeley business plan competition with it. And it was kind of this crazy story for another day. But then we ended up selling that company to another internet firm. And so I worked at that acquiring company for a couple of years to kind of see through the obligation effectively. But then always in the back of my mind, I had this, kind of experience of, hey, this is a really interesting area that was just for many reasons appealing to me. Which I'm happy to get into the specifics of why it was appealing. But then ultimately it was just saying, hey, I want to get back on the horse and do this again. So I think maybe having done the other company gave me a little more confidence to do it the second time around, but also just being really excited about an area kind of that was underserved by technology. That's just something that's really appealing to a technologist, right?
Well, okay, you offered. So why was it appealing to you? I mean, was it just that you saw it as being underserved by technology?
There's a couple of reasons. Yeah. So first of all, I guess you could say there's low-hanging fruit, right? So understanding the state-of-the-art in computer science, seeing what was actually brought to bear at the time in the industry, there was just a divergence, right? You could kind of really push forward what's possible. So that was very appealing. A second thing is, remember, you have to kind of imagine my state of mind at the time, which is I'm a computer scientist. I can kind of go in any direction at once conceivably, right? So why would this one be appealing? Well, the second reason was that the problem is a kind of gloriously deep problem, right? What we basically do is we're a truth-finding machine. We help people find needles in haystacks, right? Haystacks are huge. You don't know what the needles look like. That is just a fascinating problem in computer science. So there's no silver bullet there, right? You can't just solve this once and for all. You have to bring everything you know to bear to solve it. So everything from great user interfaces to data visualization to artificial intelligence to these collaborative tools. In comparison to another startup where I'm making like a chat app or a marketing tech app or something, the opportunity to really bring a lot of kind of deep technical expertise to bear was really compelling, right? As a nerd, I'm a huge nerd. It was like the kind of problem that I could see myself being interested in and motivated by for a very long time. So that was number two, and I thought that was just you just don't often see these problems, right? They're not just out there everywhere. There's the kind of you hit on something and you feel just how deep and rich it is. And I think that's definitely been borne out in my experience since then. The third thing was just, again, as building a company goes, it was a very simple model, right? There's a lot of tech startups where you have kind of multiple markets, multiple sets of clients, right? You have a free service for users, but you pay for it by advertising. Who's your real master, right? Who are you actually serving? And that's a really messy, complicated question. In this industry, it's you make a great product and people buy it. And if you make a product and they don't like it, they won't buy it. And I thought that was just an honest way to do business. Is something that I, as an engineer, really can understand and get behind.
In 2011, I mean, the e-discovery industry, in some, at least to me, it seems like the e-discovery industry was one that was almost a little bit more technologically advanced than some other areas of law practice, or at least earlier on. And by 2011, there were already some companies doing some pretty sophisticated stuff in the area of search and review technology for e-discovery. When you looked around the industry at that point, and as you were getting started, did it seem to you that there was something missing there? There's some gap that you could fill in terms of the technology?
Yeah. So just to be clear, yeah, I mean, definitely no disrespect to all the companies in the space. I mean, it's a rich, vibrant ecosystem with kind of vendors offering services since discovery existed, right? So there's all kinds of sets of tools out there that provide a ton of value, right? So I think the areas that I thought had an opportunity for more improvement were one, I think just speed. Right, so we're moving from an on-premises to a cloud kind of environment, not just in terms of where the discovery platform lives, but where clients' data lives, right? And then that means just the scale of discoverable data is just going through the roof. And I saw that even back then, right? So in the 90s, it was, well, what's discoverable? Well, what's in your filing cabinet, right? What can we scan, right? Then it was all your Word documents on your file server, right? And then it was every email you sent, and now every attachment. Now every Slack chat and Snapchat you send is discoverable, right? So the ability to make discoverable content has only gotten easier, geometrically easier, and so the volume of data is growing hugely. And I think tools that historically have been on premises had struggled to scale easily for all the kind of clear on-premises reasons. You have to buy and allocate servers and manage them. What do you do when your client comes in with 10x the data, right? So speed was a big one. Another one was collaboration. I think that's a really big opportunity. Litigation, discovery are just inherently incredibly collaborative endeavors, right? And a lot of the tools, I think then and even now, I think a lot of the collaboration happens out of band, right? You're emailing people exported documents as attachments. You are finding any which way to talk about your work product. Often it means getting in the same room with binders, printouts of documents, working together. That's just not how the world has to collaborate, and it becomes infeasible when you're dealing with different geographies in your law firm or in-house and outside counsel collaborating together. How can we make that better? I think we've really pushed that quite a bit of ways down the road in terms of what that experience is like. Of course, there's, artificial intelligence. There's I would say the industry is just, and I think even we are just scratching the surface in terms of the kind of analyses you can bring to bear to solve this very challenging needle in a haystack problem, right? You mentioned a lot of tools around search and review. Absolutely true, right? But what about when the review has, just way more documents you can look at, or in formats you can't really handle by a standard search model, right? What do you do? So the way I think about this is, a lot of, if you just look at the historical development of vendors in the space, a lot of them really came out of law, right? Whether they're former attorneys or lit support folks who've started their own vendor, their own companies to build the software. The reality is the problems we're trying to solve here are very deeply technical, right? As I mentioned, big data at scale, artificial intelligence, real-time collaboration. These are really technical problems, right? And so if there's one way to characterize what we do, we are a technology company that's focused on law rather than a legal company that has to build technology to meet their clients' needs. And that just gives us the ability to integrate these things in a much more comprehensive way. So that's the third thing, is not just stopping at discovery, but moving beyond that to all the workflow, all the work product that you create out of the documents you found. We have a whole suite of tools around that. And I think that's an area, again, that's been underserved.
We'll get back to my interview in just a moment. But first, let's take a break to hear from the sponsors who generously support Law Next. And now, let's continue this week's interview. You talked about the sort of need to move from on-premises solutions to cloud solutions in the litigation area, in the discovery area. I think there certainly is probably still a perception that, and probably a fact more than a perception, that one provider overall kind of dominates this market, and that's Relativity. If I'm going to name names, I mean, Relativity, sure. Has long been sort of seen as the market leader. How do you view the market? I mean, I heard somebody say something like, this is Relativity's house, and everybody else is just trying to get a foot in the door. To what extent are you seeing move away from on-premises toward the cloud for e-discovery?
Yeah, well, certainly I agree. I think Relativity is absolutely the incumbent. I don't think anyone could really take issue with that. And they have a very comprehensive product for sure. So first of all, of course, Relativity itself is trying to move to the cloud with Relativity 1.
Right.
They've put in, tens of millions or really hundreds of millions of dollars in development on that product, right? And they're kind of trying to find a way to short circuit
where they're putting the emphasis these days in their marketing. Relativity 1.
Right. And they're really kind of short circuiting their own vendor ecosystem, which is interesting. So I think they see the need, and honestly, that's made our life a lot easier, right? Yeah. When the incumbent is moving to the cloud, it's less a competition of whether the cloud makes sense anymore, and it makes it feel like much more of an inevitability, which it really is. And then we get to compete on the merits, which of course we're very happy to do. And so, yeah, I mean, I think they're absolutely there. I think they're a smart company making the right decision to move to the cloud. I think also it's a very hard and challenging thing they're trying to do, and I know they know that. So I think, there's an opportunity, of course. Many industries, of course, are all in the cloud, and then the competition happens entirely in the cloud, right? Whether you're using G Suite or Microsoft Office or whatever, these are mature ecosystems all in the cloud, and I think that's an area we're very happy to get to, because I think on the technology perspective, what your experience is like in the cloud, I, of course, think that, we're second to none. And I think we've seen, of course, our company has grown, of course, on people moving away from these other solutions to ours, right? This isn't a new greenfield industry, right? We are competing in every deal against an existing technology, and I think we've had a lot of success exactly in that arena.
Yeah. It's tough to do, though. I mean, it's tough to get lawyers to move off of whatever they're using. If you're going to law firms, it's tough to get. There's this inertia factor, I would imagine, in pitching to law firms.
Yeah, there definitely is. I think you will see simultaneously a lot of inertia and a lot of discontentment, right? There's a dissatisfaction with Relativity, with any existing solution, whether it's speed, whether it's ease of use as compared to complexity, right? Whether it's rate of innovation, handling new file types, whatever it might be. And I think so you kind of have both of those together. And so, of course, what we have to do, and the way you move people off of any existing solution where there's inertia, is provide an improvement that's so substantial, right, that it's easy for them to adopt, right? That's the way you get anyone to adopt technology, right? You don't trick them into using it. You make something that's really compelling. And I think that's just what we're trying to do here. And I think there's a lot of analogies to even the consumer space in terms of how we approach that experience for users. And that's, I think, a pretty significant differentiator from the kind of very enterprise-oriented experience that people are used to having in this space.
How do you communicate that to lawyers? I mean, as you said, you're a technology company, tackling a legal problem. And I think a lot of lawyers don't necessarily get the technology, or maybe don't even want to get the technology. They just want to know, what can this do for me? So, if you're offering what you're describing as a better solution, how do you convey that to legal professionals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, of course, right, thinking of us as a technology company in legal space, you mentioned solving a legal problem. Of course, what we're doing is we're solving all the technology problems so that our clients can solve the legal problems, right? The actual things they really want to do, right? No one wants to be a glorified data manager. They want to be thinking about the law, right? So the same way, the analogy I would use there is if you're a doctor and you need to build, an MRI machine, right? Complex piece of technology to help you aid your clients better, right? You wouldn't call up another doctor and say, build me an MRI machine, right? You'd call up engineers who are very good at building these complex pieces of technology. You'd tell them what you need, and they'd listen to you, and they'd build an MRI machine that's going to meet your needs, right? So that's how I think about what we are in the market. We are very good at technology. We, of course, listen to lawyers all the time about what they need, but we have a completely, I would say, more mature set of tools in terms of being able to build what they need, right? As the engineers of the legal technology, the analogy is to the engineers making the MRI system. Like, you want an engineer building that system, right? You don't want a doctor who knows what they want out of it trying to engineer something that complicated. So I think there is, a great opportunity for us to work, of course, with everybody to learn what their needs are and then solve their problems with good technology. So how do we convey it to users? I mean, the reality is, like, I would say, there is a pervasive stereotype, maybe not within law, but certainly outside of law, right? That lawyers don't like technology, right? They're a bunch of Luddites, they're slow moving. And I've always resisted that notion pretty strongly. And, my most compelling piece of evidence is that every lawyer everywhere immediately adopted smartphones the instant they came out, right? BlackBerry came out, every lawyer had a BlackBerry. iPhone came out, every lawyer got an iPhone or an Android or whatever, right? Yeah. These tools are very sophisticated pieces of technology, but they've really clearly helped lawyers do a better job at what they do, at their profession. And so every lawyer immediately saw that and adopted these things probably earlier than almost any other industry wholesale, right? So that is a testament. Lawyers like good technology, and they will absolutely use great technology to help them do better. What they don't like, of course, is bad technology, right? So if you give them something good, they'll use it. And so our whole goal,
and they don't like the learning curve either. Is the other part of that.
Sure. Yeah. Of course. When I mean by good technology, if it's easy to use, they'll use it. Yeah. Good technology is not just does it provide every bell and whistle, right? Is it something that you can actually use, right? Is it something that makes sense to you, that's built for how you work, right? That's accessible, let's say, to you. So that's how we think about it, right? When we build our software, it's not just can it do everything that you need it to do, which of course we care a lot about, and we go very deep into those complex workflows, but can we do it in such a way that's empowering to you, right? That you understand, that you're able to use rather than being kind of afraid of, right? So the way I think about it, again, is changing the tenor of the discussion. If you talk to a lot of lawyers or legal lit support professionals, there's a kind of a very negative experience they have with their discovery software, right? It's kind of a necessary evil. Well, I have to use this thing. It's hard. It's messy. I have to use it because I need it to do my job, as opposed to their phones, which they love, right? So we try to think about how to build the product to change the tenor of that discussion so that they view the discovery product, Everlaw, is a different kind of experience. It's something that they love, something that empowers them. And that means absolutely not only making it very deep to meet their needs, but also very accessible. So it's something that they view as a trusted assistant, as an aid, rather than a necessary evil that they have to kind of dig into because they have no other choice.
So how do you do that? How do you build it in a way that they get that?
Yeah, well, first, every interaction with the platform, if you ever poke around in it, is built to be both extremely accessible to new users, kind of beautiful and elegant, and also very deep for power users. We have to walk that line. And so we just have a very strong bias, towards, as when you think about what technology means, it's not just is the back-end AI algorithm powerful, is it accessible to users, right? Great design. And I think that's one of the things that comes really into play when you look at smartphones, right? They're not just supercomputers in your pocket. They're incredibly elegant and sophisticated and accessible all at the same time, right? So we actually just build our product to marry those things together. And that requires both a great design and product sense, which I think, again, we are built to create, and great technology married to it, right, on the back end. I think that's kind of how we've designed our companies to provide that experience. So the answer is not just we do this one thing. It's every aspect of the platform is designed even from the first screen you see to building, a complex data visualization, to have that kind of consumer level look and feel, right? The consumer level experience that, lawyers are people too. They're consumers. You give them that experience, they will use it. So can we do that rather than just saying, this is an enterprise product, let's give up on usability. Let's have a 100-hour training course for everybody. We think, how can we make it so you can get what you need out of it in a consumer accessible way? And that's just the philosophy we have behind the product design.
You talked about AI, and at what point did you see that AI or machine learning needed to be part of this platform, and how does Everlaw use AI?
Oh yeah, very early on. I mean, I think it's one of these things where it's an inevitability in the industry. It's a question of how it's going to be used. The volume of data, again, is so large that even maxing out your budget and time, you can't look through every document, right? So how do you figure out which ones to look at, right? You have 1 million or 2 million or 5 million docs in your case. You can only look through a fraction of those. What fraction, right? And that's a hard decision to have to make, especially because your clients are not very sympathetic. If you just say, hey, I didn't get to look at the right doc, well, you should have, right? So the AI is meant as a prioritization. That's how we think about it. It works in tandem with users to help prioritize where to direct human effort. And I think that's a really important part of how we work. Is law is a very subjective domain where there's lots of ambiguity and lots of context, and that's something where people are best at. There's no AI out there in any domain that's kind of good enough to understand the full context of an email or a conversation and the implications of it. So we don't think of it as replacing people. We think of it as augmenting them, right? You show us what's interesting. We build an AI around what you think is interesting. We go do the legwork to prioritize the other, 99% of the documents you haven't looked at and help you spend your time most wisely. So that's how we think about it, as a kind of a partner in the efforts to kind of understand your corpus. So how do we do that? Well, that's a hard thing, right? So then you have to think about more substantial questions, right? Well, is it just a very simple tool where all it does is give you a rank prioritization? Well, that's hard for lawyers to get behind, right? If they don't know how well the system is doing, how can they trust it? There's a lot of skepticism, as there should be. So we have a tool, and this is something that's hard to describe. It's much easier to show in, let's say, a screenshot, but that is not only very accessible, meaning that it kind of gives you this prioritization, but it's also very defensible. It gives you a ton of transparency about how well the AI is doing, where it's doing really well, and where it's not doing well. And as a user, you can dive into those representative documents and understand, do I have faith in the system? And if so, I'm happy to use it. And if not, there's all kinds of ways to get it to improve its performance. But we want to make sure that transparency is there, because ultimately transparency and vulnerability are what build trust. And so we built the AI so that it's very clear about not just what it's recommending, but also how well it's performing. And there are actually pretty interesting statistical ways to do that, so that users can, basically bring it to bear in a way that they have confidence behind it. And ultimately, that is the only way you're going to get any legal team to use an AI, is when they have confidence in the results.
I mean, it sometimes seems to me that e-discovery has been kind of the proof of the efficacy of AI in the legal industry more broadly. I mean, AI machine learning has worked pretty well in e-discovery, and there have been a number of studies by people such as Maura Grossman that have documented the effectiveness of AI, and even to the extent of suggesting that in some cases it can do a better job than humans at sort of sorting out what's relevant and what's not, and do it certainly much more quickly and at lower cost than humans can do it. I don't know. I have a question there, but I mean, it's just sort of seems that as I say, it's been sort of the proof of concept for that's extended AI into M&A contract review in other areas where it's been more broadly accepted.
Absolutely. I think it's a fantastic success story for AI. Just to be clear, even in those studies, of course, all those studies rely on human input to start off the process. Now, they're using continuous active learning, which of course we do as well, the kind of state-of-the-art technologies, but they're all trained by humans when you're determining responsiveness for a particular matter. So there is that kind of coordination and collaboration between the machine and the human that I think is essential to kind of how you think about predictive coding, that I think we believe is essential to kind of moving it forward. Now, there's other analyses that you can do that don't require any human training, and we're working on some of those as well. But ultimately, the whole package is one in which the greatest successes are the ones where you're kind of marrying that human ability to deal with ambiguity and context with the computer's ability to scale kind of dimensionally and across many documents at once to kind of extrapolate from human intelligence. So I think that's why it's such a great example of this.
Right. It's that augmentation as you
exactly.
described it before, or I've heard people refer to it as a robotic exoskeleton for lawyers.
The mech warrior for lawyers. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Exactly. How's that? So you've received some funding from some pretty big name Silicon Valley firms. You started in 2000. Well, not started. You had some prior funding. You got a Series A round in 2016, 8.1 million, led by Andreessen Horowitz. You then had a subsequent round, $25 million Series B, in just last year with Menlo Ventures, one of a long-established venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, and also Andreessen Horowitz continuing to participate in that. It seemed to me, I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked to me like you might have been Andreessen Horowitz's first venture into legal, or certainly one of their first venture into legal. They've put some money into legal companies since then. But I mean, what do you think it is that these Silicon Valley firms saw in Everlaw that made you stand out from some of the others out in the e-discovery field?
Yeah, my understanding is that we were Andreessen Horowitz's first legal tech investment, which, to their credit, of course, is a big kind of leap of faith on their side. A lot of venture capitalists, of course, are invest in what they know, right? And what they know is enterprise and consumer and a whole bunch of other verticals, but rarely law, right? So that makes it hard for a legal tech company to go say, hey, well, what about us? And I think Andreessen Horowitz, their thesis, of software eating the world, that's kind of their famous line that in every industry, in every vertical, software is going to become the foundation for the kind of the next generation of work, right? Makes us, or legal tech in general, more appealing to them because they understand this is a vertical where ultimately everything's going to be running on software, right? Not just discovery, but every post-discovery litigation move, certainly with Everlaw. But I think, again, with any technology in the future is going to be running on kind of a unified layer of software. So they understood that. I don't know that we were competing against other e-discovery platforms at the time. I think, us coming in, again, with a very strong technology bench, my background as a computer scientist, the way we built the company to solve the hardest tech problems in the space, I think was a differentiator. Again, maybe in contrast to some of the other vendors in the space that come from a more traditional legal background. I will say, of course, when we're pitching to them, we're not competing against legal tech. We're competing against every other startup, trying to get money. And I think, Andreessen, their stats were, I think they hear about 2,000 to 3,000 pitches a year, and they invest in about 20. Right. So for us, it's how do you get to that 20? And I think to their credit, when we talk about our space, clearly, we have a very compelling product, I think. And I think what a lot of VCs see is, it's a conservative buyer, a fragmented market, that's a little scary. Right. And I think what Andreessen Horowitz saw, much to their credit, definitely is, conservative buyer, fragmented market. This is a very interesting opportunity. Right. And so I think that was something that got them going. Our board member who joined, Steven Sinofsky, was at Microsoft for a very long time. He was a president of Windows, ran Office. So he was involved in Microsoft's antitrust days, and he knew what discovery was like. And so he knew the opportunity for improvement there. And I think that was a very compelling thing for someone to have lived through that, to have looked at the boxes of documents and OCR scans and the kind of last generation software and know, hey, again, you can do better here. So I think that was their perspective, was seeing that opportunity.
What have those investments meant for you as a company?
A ton, right? I mean, so, the Menlo investment, of course, was a little further along, right? We had a lot of traction. We were growing very quickly. luckily, they already knew a little bit about us. They'd done their homework, and legal tech wasn't as foreign, even a couple years later as it was in 2016. So that was another wonderful conversation we had with them. We aligned instantly over the vision and where we were going. The investments mean a lot of things, right? So we are a very long-term oriented company in general. That's actually our core company philosophy internally. Make decisions for long-term outcomes, right? Legal it's a race, as is with any startup, but it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So your reputation matters, the quality of your service, your experience, all those things matter. And in contrast, I think to, you can imagine many startups that try to move as rapidly as possible, right? Well, this is an industry where we think moving really rapidly can be to your detriment, right? Whether it's a security breach or just the stakes are very high. So the investment lets us, of course, put a lot of resources towards building out a system to succeed in the long term, right? Hiring a head of revenue in terms of product and development, of course, and also security and compliance, right? And naturally building out our go-to-market team, sales and marketing, business development. So all of the above. We also just opened a UK office, so in London, and that's been just last month. So that's been a really interesting experience for us. I'm really excited about that. We've seen a lot of kind of interest on that side. And also just making longer term bets in terms of product, in terms of just how we build the company out. So it wasn't, for one particular thing. It was do more of what we've done at a larger scale.
Yeah. What's been the growth trajectory during that time? I mean, where are you in terms of revenue and employees and reach?
Yeah, well, very good, I would say. We're over 100 employees. We have hundreds and hundreds of customers. We are dealing with, of course, law firms, primarily mid and large size law firms. I think that's our bread and butter, though we do have some smaller ones, but also corporations, mid and up to very, very large corporations, governments, tons of penetration at the state level, but also municipal level now, and federal as well. We're moving into federal, so that's pretty exciting for us. So just kind of an all of the above approach. I think the platform has shown its versatility in kind of meeting this disparate set of needs, and we're kind of excited to just go to market.
I read either on your website or in some press materials or something that if the attorney generals of all 50 states are your customers. Did I get that right?
Yeah, we have users at all 50 states. We actually have. Is
that a market that you've gone after in particular, or how did that come to be?
Yeah, it is. I mean, they're great clients. They have very complex needs, complex cases. We actually have a contract with the National Association of Attorneys General, in addition to individual AGs, to serve as an umbrella contract across all of them. So that's really exciting. But yeah, so we have a lot of use at that level. It's pretty neat.
You mentioned law firms, you mentioned corporations. Is that changing at all in terms of who you're selling to? And I guess by that I mean, are corporations as customers increasing or decreasing, or how is that happening? I mean, I'm hearing a lot that corporations, have over the last few years started to be much more active in making these kinds of decisions, and in fact, and even kind of directing these kinds of decisions for their outside firms in terms of the litigation software they're using or e-discovery platforms that they're using. Are you seeing any of that from your perspective?
Oh yeah, definitely increasing. The funny thing, of course, is if you talk to law firms, they say, our big law firm clients. Well, they're the one. If you talk to big law firms, they say our big corporate clients are the ones dictating what software to use. And if you go to the corporate clients, they say, well, our big law firm, outside counsel are the ones dictating what software to use. But the reality is, it is an interplay. The bigger the entity, the more pull they have, right? So we sell to both sides. And I think that's been pretty successful. Certainly for the bigger corporate legal departments, they have their own operations, right? I mean, they have a whole legal team. They're doing investigations at a large scale. They're doing, pre-litigation, even coordinating with their outside counsel during litigation. And so, Everlaw is a great fit for them because we already kind of plug into their technologies. We operate at a scale and sophistication that they very much understand. Another really big thing for us is that from a security perspective, I think we are, I would say, an industry leader in terms of the kind of comprehensiveness of the security model that we have and security certifications that we have. And so for large corporations, that's very reassuring. we go through these monster security audits. Really, the harder, the better for us. That's a great market differentiator for us. And corporations, when we come out the other end, are comfortable using us in a way that typically they're not able to really get from other legal vendors. So there's kind of a lot of alignment in terms of what we offer and what corporations need.
What are your plans for your product and your company over the next couple of years? I mean, do you have changes that you want to make to the platform? Are you looking? I know you mentioned the UK. I know you're in some other. I think you're in Australia. Some other overseas markets from the United States. How do you look to grow the platform, and how do you look to grow the company?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, we're in the UK. We're also in EU. We're in Frankfurt. We're in Canada. We're in Australia. Certainly the product, I feel, our roadmap is pretty extensive. There's a lot to grow. There's a lot more pieces to connect. That end-to-end experience of running a whole litigation in Everlaw, I think, is going to be a reality. It already is. I think we've gotten pretty far. We're going to plug in some extra pieces there to make it completely seamless, right? So not just
which part of the process do you start? Do you start with collection and go forward?
We start one step after collection, right? So we start with ingestion and processing. So wherever your data is, if you've got a handle on it, we'll take it wholesale from there, whatever the format it is, whether it's an EO1 forensic disk images or Slack chats, right? We'll get it in there, and we have direct connections to cloud sources too. So collections as a thing is, I think, over time going to decrease as as entities go to the cloud more, right? So it's a direct connection. So from there, all the way through to kind of, case prep, work product creation kind of stuff. So, the conventional discovery components of having, IT folks getting data in and lit support and paralegal review teams doing it, all very much in there. And then going beyond that to what we call story building, right? Partners at law firms, taking the work product, senior associates, taking that work product, preparing for a deposition, creating a motion or brief with evidence in Everlaw is something you can do right now. So going further there to fill out even more tools in that regard, more core discovery tools, of course, more data visualizations, more sophisticated communications analyses, more data types to handle, more and robust artificial intelligence tools to augment our predictive coding tool. We have a 20-item AI roadmap there. So all these things, collaborative tools, as I mentioned, organizational tools for, we have clients that have, 50, 100 plus cases on Everlaw, right? So how do you manage information across all those matters? We have an organizational administration tool now. We're going to be building out on that to give you better cross-matter intelligence. So yeah, many, many things in the product side. And then, of course, is serving all of these different roles better, right? So I mentioned just a handful there, right? IT, paralegals, lit support, reviewers, associates, partners, in-house counsel, technical experts, all these folks are living in this rich ecosystem. So making sure that we go deep on each of those as well, right? Not just a superficial reading, right, of the minimum it takes to go from end to end, but how much depth can we provide to each so that we can handle their workflows, right? And ease that transition from their kind of entrenched processes now, a lot of it manual, into something kind of the new world with Everlaw, doing a lot of that for them to make sure that they can focus again on the legal problems rather than the technical problems.
AJ, last month the e-discovery company Catalyst was acquired by OpenText for $75 million. Do you have an end game in mind for your company? Where do you see the long-term future?
Yeah, great question. I really don't, actually. It's kind of interesting. We kind of, in my mind, right? Okay, so to step back a second, getting back to that early question of, what kind of startup should I get into? What area should I get into? You can imagine, building something completely out of legal tech. I could have gone and made, a game or an app that people use for, 5 minutes a day, right? And they have, millions of users and they all play this game for 5 minutes. That's great, right? That's actually a lot of value. 5 million user minutes of happiness a day is pretty neat, right? But we actually have a very different kind of opportunity, right? So people use Everlaw for hours a day, sometimes all day. So you kind of have the opportunity to not just make someone happy for 5 minutes, but actually make them materially happier at the end of the day, right? Their experience of life is better using a system like ours, right? So I think that's a pretty awesome opportunity. I don't think that comes along that often. I think I'm very lucky to have fallen into it. So I think our ambitions here are pretty big, right? I think you don't often get the chance to change the way work is done in the whole industry. So to that point, we want to make a successful business. And I mean that very honestly. I'll tell you, when we raised our Series A round in our deck, I didn't have a single slide on, exits. Like what would happen? What's the exit, landscape look for us? Not a single slide. And, our investors, they didn't ask, right? Because we're all interested in building this giant kind of the company that I think is going to change legal, I hope. And our Series B, similarly, I had a whole slide deck about where we've come and where we're going, but not a single slide on exits, right? Who we're going to get acquired by or anything like that. And they didn't ask either, because we all, again, are very aligned. The exit here is to build the most successful company we can, and I really mean that. So that's how we think about, long-term outcomes. There's a saying, the best companies are bought, not sold. If you're looking to build a company with a finite time frame where we want to sell, you're going to make short-term decisions, right? Because it's not your responsibility after some period of time, and we don't think about it that way. It's always our responsibility. So, yeah, the real answer is we want to make this thing as transformative as it can be.
Do you see some kind of a shakeout coming for the e-discovery market more broadly?
I think there already is a bit of a shakeout. I think, on the services side, we've seen a lot of consolidation, right? So you have vendors that, have tried to maybe be hybrid tech and service vendors, figuring out which way they want to go. Other ones kind of just getting acquired to build these monoliths. I think that's going to continue. In any industry, if there's next generations of technology, you will see some component of the prior generations getting consolidated. So I think that's going to continue to happen. So I would say I don't see it coming. I think it's already happening. I think we're going to see more of it.
AJ, I'm going to give you the last word. Anything else that you wanted to mention about Everlaw that we haven't talked about?
Oh, of course, if you're listening, you should check it out. Nothing more. I think we covered a lot of ground here. I'm always happy to talk about these things. I think there's I'll just tell you, as a technologist who's now come into the industry for almost a decade, it's been just such a pleasure. I can't tell you just how rewarding the space is, right? The complexity of the problems, the willingness of users to kind of look forward. Again, in contrast to the stereotypes, it's been awesome. So I'm really excited about where we're going, and I think where the industry is going. I think, if you're listening, whatever challenges you're facing now, in litigation, I think in 5 years, it'll be a different world for the better. So I'm kind of excited to help be part of getting everyone there.
Well, we're excited to watch where you go from here and follow your progress. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. Oh, sorry. Can I add one more thing? I did think of something.
Ahead.
Is this bad? Yeah. The other thing I'll mention is we do actually have a free program. So if you're listening and you're not embedded in litigation, we have a free program for journalists, for investigative journalists, and for nonprofits. So we have a host of folks using us for free who can't, afford to pay our normal fees, right? Whether it's Electronic Frontier Foundation or Associated Press, or the New York Times mentioned us recently as one of the tools they use. So if you do know folks who are in those areas and want a tool that can help them sift through haystacks at no cost, to have them reach out to us. I think it's journalists@everlaw.com, and we can figure out a way to get Everlaw to work for them.
Well, that's great. And in my day job, I represent newspapers, so I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Well,
great.
This is Bob Ambrogi. We've been talking to AJ Shankar, the founder and CEO of Everlaw. A big thanks to our show producer, Ben Ambrogi. This is Bob Ambrogi. Thanks to you, all of you, for listening. Until next time, this is Law Next.